I'm currently standing on the finish line here at Turffontein Racecourse, and the reason I'm doing that is because this is exactly what the handicappers try and achieve, to get all the horses to cross this line at the same time by handicapping them accordingly. It doesn't always work out that way because some horses run above form and some horses run below form. But the general idea is to make horses as competitive as possible for owners to derive revenue. Now, if you take a look in the far distance, you'll see the National Horse Racing Authority, which is where Vee Moodley holds office. And he's always been one of those innovative guys that likes to use very famous people's ideologies to try and get people to think out of the supposed conventional wisdom box. In this particular item, he's used none other than the great Albert Einstein, who once said, for every action there is an equal but opposite reaction, namely the theory of relativity. But Vee's chosen another priceless quote, and let's go now to the National Horse Racing Authority and meet some of the journalists, some of the trainers who've been on this roadshow around South Africa to describe a new innovation, something to uplift the lower echelon of horses to make them competitive. Let's start off with Lennon Maharaj.
Basically, we've got a congestion of horses due to the slippage factor and exacerbated by the guidelines imposed on the handicappers. It's not entirely the fault of the guidelines. It's a contributory factor that has led us to this situation where we've got something like 74% of the horse population in the bottom division of racing. And that doesn't make for a good race program and not good for totalizated turnovers. That's why there's a paucity of MR90s, MR100s. We need those races. We need particularly handicaps. Handicaps provide competitive big fields, which is good for turnovers, and we need those, and we don't have it. And basically that's the reason for this £10 increase that's been proposed. I would also like to clarify that this does not affect international ratings, which are done separately by the WBRRC, which is a committee that I'm part of. So those £10 increase is purely a domestic level change, and it would not affect any horse that's got an international rating.
Okay, so people are completely cognizant of the purpose of this initiative, but there is a feeling that perhaps that from an actuarial perspective that there could be a quotient, there could be a loading at the bottom and sliding towards the better rated horses. And of course that's work in progress. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation.
Look, the slippage factor, irrespective of the guidelines, will happen. Because if you think of any race that's rated, the lion horse, particularly in handicaps, usually come in the top three. So usually, although there are exceptions, the lion horse would be at worst the third or even fourth place horse, which means majority of the horses, to give them a chance of being competitive, will have to drop. And fewer horses go up and go through the divisions. This is the reason for the slippage factor. It will always exist. Unless we use the middle horse as a lion horse, we will always have the slippage factor. But when you got guidelines also that's been imposed, it exacerbates the problem and makes it a little bit worse. But it's not entirely the fault of the guidelines. But we can't get away from this. So instead of what we're working towards is, instead of increasing the population every year or 2 years, we'd rather increase the population every 5 to 6 years. Ideally, never at all. But that's in an ideal world. It's not going to work out that way.
Well, for one, Sean Terry said that he doesn't see this as a long-term solution because slippage is endemic with the whole merit rating system.
Look, Sean's, we appreciate his opinions because he knows what he's talking about. The day that he came to this meeting, he spent 2 hours, I think, in traffic, and we appreciate his time and his input in terms of his presence there. And he's quite right. The £10 increase is a short-term fix. It's an immediate fix. It's going to help immediately. But we've got to look at ways to sustain the system. Working merit rating / programming system. We've got to work on that. And part of our discussions going forward is going to be, and has been raised by people like Sean Terry and others, is in terms of how we drop horses. So that's something that we're going to look at. From the 1st of August, we will be implementing our new way forward. We will advertise to everybody. We will release guidelines and handicapping methodologies so that people are aware of how we're going to work. But we are looking at ways, and one of the ways is to perhaps drop horses more, intelligently, I would suppose. Not just blindly dropping horses, just looking at factors why a horse might go off form, which we look at anyway. And a trainer is probably under pressure to run horses, and sometimes he's running a horse when he might not be in the pink of fitness or health.
Because the owner wants him to.
Because he's under pressure to run. And let's face it, economically it makes sense to run because that's where you're going to earn.
Obviously, the handicapping guidelines have taken most of the brunt for the slippage factor, but in years gone by we've had exactly the same without the guidelines. So that I always find interesting. And then obviously, once we are putting all that information out there, it's important to show the public which rules were the culprits in terms of the major slippage. I do think that Vee obviously understands this industry well, and especially handicapping, and I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't see how the 10-point rise is simply going to change everything. It's all about application, and the system is one thing, but it's how you apply it, which is the most important thing. And yeah, obviously there's going to be some new, fresh stances from the handicappers. Otherwise, I can't see how it would work.
But remember, Andrew, also, we've always been under pressure to drop horses. We've always had this criticism that we don't drop horses fast enough. And we used to use those excuses in the past. Horses not running over its correct distance, horses possibly off form, and we constantly get slated for that. And now we are dropping horses fairly quickly, and it's created another problem perhaps. So I think with Vee at the helm, it's time that we stand up, we do things correctly for the right reasons, and this is going to be reviewed and we're going to stick to it.
I trust Vee Moodley, to be honest. If Vee thinks it's the right thing, I have faith in Vee in making the right decision, to be honest. If it was coming from anybody else, I would say they're mad. But I have faith in Vee. So as simple as that. I don't have too much faith in a lot of the guys in the right places, but I have faith in Vee. So if he's doing it, I'm with him.
Owners and trainers are under pressure to earn. If a horse continually runs badly, we have to drop a horse because we want that horse to be competitive. It's good for racing. Competitive horses are good for racing. You don't want horses just to make up a field and not be competitive all the time because it's not going to attract any turnover. It's just going to run downfield and and be overrated. And I think despite whatever the criticism is, we've actually done well in dropping these horses. A lot of our handicaps are really competitive. The problem is the slippage. That is the problem. If you keep dropping horses, you're going to have the horses populating the bottom end of the long handicap, and you're not going to have a middle division, and that is the problem. So we've got to decide whether we're happy to raise the population every 5 or 6 years and have competitive racing, or have a strict regimented way of dropping horses and have big fields with half of them not having a chance. I don't think that's good for racing.
It's the owners and trainers that we need to get it right of the horses that are penalised too high. And obviously when horses are dropping too quickly, you've also got to just apply your minds that it's not necessarily a guideline. It may just be that these horses haven't been exposed by the time they're on the way down and don't really get the opportunity to prove themselves. So there are a few ways to look at it. I'm not really the person to give you the yay or the nay. As I say, we've had the increase before, we've had the slippage before, we've been here before. There aren't going to be any more winners. There's only X amount of races on the card. All you're doing by raising the population 10 pounds is that you're opening up a new bottom division. And the only beneficiaries of this system or the raise are the horses at the absolute bottom. If you're telling me the horses at the top are not affected, then how does it affect our international classification or anything like that? You'd have to explain that to me. I'm sure with Vee at the helm, that may make the difference.
I thought the trainer turnout was quite poor. I think there was only about 7 trainers here today, and a very, very interesting subject. And I would recommend or guarantee that if this is open again for the public, the more people, the merrier, especially knowledgeable on merit ratings.
Ideally, what this particular endeavour is designed to do is to try and elevate the mediocrity, to give the man in the street who owns horses, even if it's just an arm or a leg, an opportunity to earn cash.
Yeah, that was also very enlightening for me. I think they're going in the right direction with that, to raise I know there's very negatives and positives on it, but to raise the bar a bit and, as you say, get more opportunities for the lesser horses, and obviously bring the average man in the street like ourselves, shares and syndicates, and then have a bit of fun racing. So that'll certainly help in the long run.
I know that it's work in progress, but what was your initial feeling about this decision by the NHA?
Well, I think it'll just give more horses an option to get into races. It's a fact of life that there's a lot more horses at the bottom in small with lower ratings than there were before. I must say, from my and Mark's side, I really came out of there with a lot more knowledge than what I went in with. So good, well done to Vee and to Lennon. They were very open, and to see things the way they see them really opened my mind a lot.
And there were a couple of interesting guests. I mean, there was one guy that we'd never ever heard of before that has got an incredible mind and shed a lot of light on some very interesting nuances in the handicapping of horses.
Yeah, very pertinent. And again, it opens you up. You don't think of those kind of things. And to see it up there in writing as such from a totally different mind, well, I just wish I had that kind of brain.
So much better. It's so much transparency. Since Mr. Moodley's come in there, and especially with the merit rating system, because we didn't know where we stood, and it was more to tell us exactly what's going to happen going forward and where we are at the moment compared to the international ratings. So we walked out of there much more knowledgeable about merit rating system and where we're going to in this country.
Look, I think that the roadshow was good, but as for the £10 increase on the merit ratings, I can't agree with that. I think it's a programming problem and not the merit rating problem. These horses, even if you raise them £10, the good ones will stay there, and the moderate animals are still going to drop down in the ratings. And to be quite honest, if 75% of your horses are 72 and below, program accordingly. All I do know is that we have to provide races for the better horses as well, even though there's going to be smaller fields. We have to somehow program that the low merit rated horses are more catered for.
In other words, the churn factor is there for the owners that are paying the same as the horse that's a brilliant horse.
Not only the churn factor, at the end of the day, the operator will get more turnover, and his percentage that he takes out stays the same, because they'll be more competitive. They'll have to load the pick sixes, the PAs, the quartets, all that. So in actual fact, your turnovers will go up, I would presume.
So slippage is something that we are stuck with. It is a fact of life.
Nature, majority is moderate. Whether it comes to human beings, horses, anything. Majority of humans, animals are moderate. There's only those few that will excel.
Andrew, the problem with raising the whole population by £10 is that you now distort your benchmarks for programming purposes. But realistically, if the merit rating system is working like it should be, there shouldn't be a massive difference between your domestic ratings and your international ratings, especially at the top. I don't think there's that much difference at the top anyway, as we stand right now.
We've always known that the population and where the ratings are of the population is a big problem in the game, where 73% of the horses fall below a 72 rating and below. That is a major issue, and unfortunately, as the programmer, we cannot program 70% of the races for those horses. So we need to find a balanced program, which we believe that we do our best at drawing up. But unfortunately, because there's such a large amount of horses in that lower population, what happens is there's eliminations, there's splitting of the fields, people don't get runs, and that's where the major complaints actually lie. So with Vee addressing the issue, raising the population £10, we believe that what will happen is the middle divisions, C and D divisions, will now fill up, and there will still be full fields in the E and F divisions because of the horses that are rated so lowly. And it's unfortunate that they are rated where they are. Vee says that it's mainly because of the guidelines. I'm sure it's part of the problem, but there were other issues that were discussed here, dropping horses too quickly for certain things that shouldn't be dropped. So a lot of issues were addressed, and hopefully it will take the game to another level.
Every year we've had to push the ratings of the horses across the spectrum up by £5 or £6 or £4. Some years we leave it. This system is designed naturally to depress ratings. In every race, let's say we average 12 runners a race, you've got one winner. Maybe the winner and maybe the second horse run to their ratings. The third, fourth, fifth and further down the generally don't run to their ratings. Horses are not going to reproduce their best form every single time they run, especially average horses. So what does the handicapper have to do? To try and make all horses equal, he has to adjust the ratings of the horses that haven't quite run to their rating on that particular day. So how many races horses run 8 or 10 times a year? They're not going to run to their rating each time. They're only going to win a race once a year, twice a year. Now and again, a really good horse will win 3 times in a year. Well, he's a good horse. That's easy to assess that horse. He's going to be high up in the ratings anyway. So what's happened is that there's a lot of horses being pushed into the bottom divisions. And every year I think we're going to end up with this problem. That's the way the merit rating is designed, and certainly the way we apply it in South Africa, that's what happens. And so you're always going to have this depression of the whole population and a need every year to up them by 5 or 6 pounds. I think 10 was too much. I think it skews the ratings at the top from a programming point of view. We've now got an A division race that's got to be pegged at 115. 115 is a grade 1 horse anywhere in the world.
I look at it almost at the same way you would look at IQs in people. Okay, there's an average, and there's people distributed around the average. And when you look at a population, if you've got 130 IQ, it means you're 30% better than the average population. That's effectively what it means. It's not an absolute number. Handicapping works exactly the same. 126 or 121 that a WAM is doesn't tell you anything. It's an absolute number, but it's relative to a benchmark, and that benchmark is the average in the population. What the 121 actually means is that a WAM is around about 56 pounds or half kilos better than the average horse in the population. And that's the important part I think everybody misses about handicapping. It's an expression of the outperformance of a horse against the average horse in the population.
You're always going to have a pyramidal approach in most handicapping systems whereby the top is very narrow, the apex, and it's not an exact pyramid. It's skewed in the way it's got a big base and you don't have enough middle to it. They've amended the guidelines in feature races whereby horses that now run places in feature races will get some of the penalty, a percentage of the penalty, and that's left to the handicapper's discretion because he'll look at all factors, which I feel is fair enough anyway. Yeah. If they get it wrong after the next run or two, they can adjust the horse back to where he should be. And that way you'll bulk your middle up a little bit. But it's not going to be the panacea to this problem, because how many horses run in feature races?
The statistics around the NHS stats around why this is happening are very clear and overwhelming. We can see why it's happening. So we need to do it. I would say the one thing that I would say from the operator's perspective, we need to adapt our race program, obviously, to fit into what the NHA are doing and trying to achieve by driving the population up into the higher divisions. We need to just make sure that whatever they do in terms of going forward, that it's sustainable by changing and making changes to the guidelines to make sure we're not having to address the slippage sort of every year and a half or whatever it is. It needs to be potentially every 5 years, if there is a bit of slippage. But they need to change what they're doing to make sure it's sustainable.
If you look at worldwide, I mean, we always talk about the time form top 3 or the racing post top 3, but in any handicap system, you always see the same phenomenon. The top 3 handicapped horses have a higher percentage chance of winning than any other horse, and exactly the opposite of the bottom 3 handicapped horses. So merit rating system for a punter is an absolutely valuable signal in telling you which horses have a better chance. Now, that doesn't mean you can make money, and it doesn't mean they're going to win. What it does tell you is those horses potentially have the ability to win, which is far higher than a horse rated lower, and you then obviously got to use your own judgment on whether the odds offer value. That's at the end of the day, value is all there is to punting, because you're looking at an outcome which you're uncertain of, and the only way to price that in or to gamble on that is to discern whether a horse has a better chance than the odds or the bookmakers are pricing him up at.
I would have taken a staggered approach and up the horses at the bottom, carefully assess this, and I would have said all horses from 0 to 60, possibly up them by 6 or 7 pounds. Horses from, and you know that your benchmarks, your 16 pounds between the whole spectrum of a division. Your next rating could have gone, say, let's from 60 or 62 up to 76 or 78. You could have pushed those up by a slightly smaller margin, and your top end horses by a smaller number. And yes, it was a staggered approach, and the problem with that is some trainers, and I can see the jockey club's concern, a trainer's going to turn around and say, the last time I met in a handicap, I received £6 from this horse. I'm now only receiving £4 from this top horse. Those are for the horses further up the scale. What's the difference? It's for one run, your first run in the new racing season. Thereafter, the handicapper is going to make some adjustment to those ratings anyway. We know the ratings are not perfect because every single race there's 10 or 12 or 14 lengths separating the horses. So clearly the handicapping system is not the perfect system. There isn't a perfect system. We mustn't knock the merit rating system. We mustn't knock anyone here. It's not a perfect system. I do think that consistency is an issue with the handicappers, and that's a concern to me. But to me, that would have been a far better approach to this problem. And I still think we need to have more input with the handicappers, and I think you need a small team like we used to have, handicapping panel that needs to sit down on a more regular basis. The handicappers need to tell us the problems they're facing while they're making these adjustments so that we can all apply our mind to this problem. But I personally think it's created quite a bit of a problem, and it's not going to solve the problems we faced. They're going to end up having horses are going to come down in the ratings again because that's the way the system's designed. So I don't.
Slide factor is endemic.
It's endemic to the system because how many winners do we have? You know, of all the horses that race, 8% of them win. I'm saying each time they run because there's one winner out of 12, an average of 12 horse field each time. So.
Hopefully, what I can do over time is just advance the debate beyond, I think, what it has been, which is talking specific issues or specific points of handicapping. I think we really got to look at the overall handicapping system and what happens on average for all the horses rather than specific cases. You're always going to find in data specific instances where handicapping didn't work or doesn't work or throws up anomalies. And hopefully I can change part of that debate, that we look at the averages, we look at the handicapping system overall to see if it works for everybody and not just for specific groups or specific horses or specific classes of horses. So that's really what my contribution is aimed at, is making sure we have a balanced debate on that issue.